from your overflowing inbox, or the most ubiquitous Google Translate, all of these applications make use of natural language processing and related tools. NLP tries to give machines the ability to understand text and speech in a manner which is similar to how humans process it. Today, we delve deeper into this domain. The Women in Computing Society welcomes Dr. Kalika Bali, who is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research India, to let us in on her research on building language technologies for the underserved communities.
Dr. Bali's research interests lie broadly in the area of speech and language technology, especially in the use of linguistic models for building technology that offers more human-computer as well as human computer-mediated interactions and technology for low-resource languages. She has been working in the field of speech and natural language processing for over 2 decades and believes that local language technology, especially with speech interfaces, can help millions of people gain entry into a world that is still now almost inaccessible to them. She has served and continues to serve on several government and other committees that work on Indian language technologies, as well as linguistic resources and standards for NLP or speech. Apart from being a researcher, Dr. Bali is a frequent speaker at platforms like ACM India, Women in Data Science, and so on. She is someone who does not need a formal introduction since her work speaks for itself. So there will be an exclusive Q&A session at the end of the talk, and you can type in your question and send them to us through the chat box. Also, as long as possible, please keep your cameras on. So once again, Vix Ashoka welcomes you, Dr. Bali.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I can see a couple of familiar faces and a couple of familiar names in the group. So it's great to be here. I'll just share, I have a PPT about my talk, but so here's how we'll do it. And if you have any other suggestions, I'm happy to kind of change it on the fly. So I'll talk about building language technology for low resource language communities for maybe about half an hour. And then after that, if you have questions on that, I can handle that. But maybe after that, we can just talk about women in tech, women in STEM, and any questions you have regarding that, we could probably discuss those issues after that. Does that sound like a good plan? Yeah. Okay. So let me just share my screen. Okay, where did it go? I'm so sorry. I'm looking for show all windows. Yeah, here it is. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. So I wanted to talk about building technology for low resource languages, because that's kind of one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I spend most of my time these days working in that area. And in a while, I'll give you my point of view of why I think this is really important, especially right now when we are seeing that NLP is having like its day in the sun. This is a very exciting time in general to be involved in natural language processing and speech technology, because of the recent advancements in, say, machine learning and deep learning techniques and technologies, things that were just impossible even, say, 7-8 years ago, things that we really could not have thought we could do as technologists working in NLP or language in general, are now like, extremely possible. But then we have to have a little bit of a nuanced view of what exactly is really possible and who is it possible for, right? This is a quote from the blog, and as as this is 2016, which you can consider as a watershed year. Like, we talk about NLP and speech pre 2016 and post 2016, because that's where all the initial deep learning models came, and all the speech and language technology, the way of doing NLP and speech just completely changed. So it's a watershed year, and this quote talks about what is the future of NLP, and if you see, it says things like intelligence, transforming how we communicate with machines and maybe even with each other, and capitalize on its potential for a human-like understanding of speech and text. So that is somehow the goal, that we should be able to talk to machines the way we talk to each other, right? So, but the main aim of any intelligent technology, all AI, should be to amplify human ingenuity, right? We're not, at least I and most of my colleagues are not of the thinking that technology should work towards replacing humans, but that technology should help humans by amplifying whatever you think of as human creativity, human ingenuity, human ability, etc. Right? And from an AI NLP point of view, this means that there should be AI should be able to, or any intelligent technology should be able to reason. That is, it should be able to learn and form conclusion from imperfect data. It should be able to understand, and what that means is that it should be able to interpret meaning of data, including text, voice, and images, and it should be able to interact with people the way humans normally do, right? So this reasoning, understanding, and interacting are the things that we kind of aim for when we are building AI, or even like parts of AI, like language technology, to be used for human computer interaction, right? So if we drill down into what exactly does this mean, these are the kind of exact problems in NLP that we focus on. So intelligence from unstructured information is like a big part of doing NLP, and a lot of the language models, etc., that we deploy, design, develop, and deploy are aimed towards that. So you extract information, meaning, sentiment, etc., from large amounts of content. We also are looking at smart search. Search is a big part again of this entire field, which is like, how can we understand intent through more natural queries? Like if somebody just says, like in that ad, they say, na, so lal wala dena. So the machine should be able to understand what does this lal wala dena actually mean, which is like, give me the red one. Even in English, it's a difficult thing for a machine to process. Like, what does give me the red one mean? On its own, it has to have the context, etc. Then there also bots are a big thing right now, faster and smarter and easier to interact with than just typing into a search bar, and of course intuitive and invisible UI. That ultimate goal of this technology is that it gets humans. It understands how humans behave. We are quite far from that, though. Like at a very superficial level, it might seem that some of the technology actually does get human, but it's not really true in in any sense of like the way humans might get each other, right? So all that is fine, and this, not taking away from all the exciting things that are happening in this field, but because if we look at what is actually happening, we see this big divide between different languages and people who speak different languages. So if you look at the actual state that we're in, and I'll take this example that we've used in some of our studies between Dutch and Somali, right? 29 million people speak Dutch and 18 million people speak Somali. So that's like quite a big language user group. But the resources that are available for Dutch are around 69. And these are the data resources that we require to build technology. For Somali, there are 2. For Dutch, we have state-of-the-art translation systems, speech systems, all kinds of technology available. The very few, very inferior translation systems available for, say, Somali, right? And if you translated the tiger moved across the grass using, say, a Google Translate or whichever machine translation system you have, and then translated it back to English, what you would get is the tiger moved across the grass. If you did it for Somali, Google Translate actually does have a Somali system, and then you've translated it back to English, you actually get beans moved on grass. So even if you're not a Somali speaker, you can understand that something is gone totally wrong and lost in the translation, right? And so the question that when we are looking at these kind of systems and they're getting excited about technology for languages, we need to kind of probably think of some broader questions like, how has the fate of different languages changed with the current language technology that we celebrate so much? How many resources are available for all the words, languages? If we correlate them to the number of speakers, right? Which features, language features are the NLP systems exposed to? Which features are underrepresented? Now, it could be a case like, for example, that some of the African languages have clicks as part of their sound system. So they actually, Hossa is like Hossa, right? So that and are part of the language system. Are the systems even exposed to that sound at all? Probably not. How inclusive are these big tier conferences, where, or research communities where research communities gather? How inclusive are these to publishing work that focuses on such languages? Because, there is, if you work on English, you don't have to say that you're working on English. You're working on the problem. But suppose you're working on even Hindi or smaller languages, like, for example, if you're working on Somali, you have to actually say that you are working on Somali, right? And now why is it that English doesn't even need to be called out, right? Then do resource availabilities influence the research questions? And so if I don't have a lot of data available to build this technology, then am I going to even aim for ACL kind of things? Am I going to then look at these problems, or am I going to say, no, let me just first build English, whatever system that I'm looking at, because I have the resources available, right? And then what can we do to bridge this divide? So we had tried to, look at some of these questions in this work that we done last year, and we published it, called The State and Fate of Linguistic Diversity in the NLP World. And we found that actually there are just a handful of languages in class 5 which have enough resources to create all this wonderful state-of-the-art technology that you keep hearing about and reading about in all media, or even like in your textbook nowadays, and people tell you about like what AI is doing in terms of language technology. Then there are these like underdogs like Bengali, Hindi, etc., where there are resources available. You don't have state of the art, but maybe if everyone gets together and works towards it and creates resources, we'll get there. Then of course there are the rising stars which have even lesser resources. But then the largest chunk of the world's languages are in class 0, the left behinds. And these are languages spoken by very big language communities. For example, the Gondi language community is of 3 million people, right? And that's not a small number of people. We're not talking about like a few thousand endangered languages only here, right? We're talking about very robust language communities which have zero resources available, right? And what can we do to look at so what should the goal of language technology and resources, people who are working in this area, should be? You really have to think beyond just the accuracy numbers and achieving the state of the art and saying like, this is the best architecture for getting 0.5% extra accuracy, right? So we work on a in a project. We have a project called Project Elora, which is enabling languages with low resources. And here we firmly believe that language technology should not be evaluated just on test benches, right? But on how many speakers of the language does it have an impact on, right? And socio-economic impact, which is much harder to work because to measure, because you have to actually deploy the system and then work with the system, but also understanding the needs when you start building the system. So it's not just like you have some random piece of test bench with some data sets and you're just constantly evaluating your system on it and saying, I have the best system in the world. You do not have the best system in the world. You have nowhere near uh, even a good system in the world if that system has zero impact on the people it's intended for, and if it does not even consider what the needs of those people are, right? And that's the philosophy that we have when we work on language technology. And I'll just very quickly tell you, um, so if somebody could like just raise their hand and tell me when I have just like 5 minutes left, so that I can pace myself accordingly. So I will tell you a tale of these two linguistic communities, Gondi and Mundari. They're both Indian languages. Gondi actually is a Dravidian language, though it's mostly spoken in Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Andhra areas. So it coexists with both, and Maharashtra. So it coexists with both North Indian as well as South Indian languages, but it's actually a Dravidian language. Um, and people there live in isolated tribal groups in small villages, a lot of them in forests. There's no standardized grammar, lexicon, or script, like in the sense like there's no, that they claim that there are different dialects, but there's not been enough study to understand if these dialects are mutually intelligible, or what kind of words are used more in one dialect compared to the other, etc., etc. And a lot of the people in these communities are illiterate and have no access to mainstream languages, right? Now, if you also know anything about the political status of uh, the area in which Gondi is spoken, then this is also the area which has a very high level of Maoist insurgency. Right, so this is all your Bastar, etc. All the area where we keep hearing about all kinds of political and often violent clashes, right, between the state and the people, or insurgents, if not the actual people, right? So one of the things that's really crucial in that area is getting information access. People don't have information access. Nobody is taught in their own language, right? They send teachers to teach in Hindi, in, say, for example, in Chhattisgarh, and those teachers have absolutely no idea. They are sent by the government. They have no idea about the culture. They have no idea about the communities. They don't know the language, the local language, but they are the ones who are going to teach the children from primary school onwards in Hindi, right? So that's the situation there. Now, Mundari has a slightly different thing. So there are about 1.2 million speakers. It's still a lot of speakers. it's an Austroasiatic language. I don't know if many of you know that there are 4 main languages, the language families in the Indian subcontinent or in India as well. And we normally know of Indo-Aryan and Dravidian, because those are the large groups. But there's also Austroasiatic, which in some sense, some people believe it's the original language of whoever was in India. So Austroasiatic is our languages spoken in parts of central India as well as northeast India. So Santali, Mundari, etc. are all Austroasiatic languages. And the third language is Sino-Tibetan. So a lot of these, northeastern languages and languages in the north, like Lahori and Spiti, languages spoken there are Sino-Tibetan. So Mundari is an Austroasiatic language. And again, what happened when we were creating the country and the states, a lot of these groups, language communities, because they were spoken by tribal groups and they lived in a tribal kind of a community, they got divided into various different states. So Mundari again is spoken in 3-4 states, like Jharkhand, West Bengal, and Odisha, right? That's where most of the Mundari speakers are. Now, what has happened in Mundari is that a kind of a language shift has happened, which hasn't happened to that extent in Gondi. So most of the Mundari speakers, the younger generation, has moved to the mainstream language of dominant language of that state. So the Mundari community in West Bengal, now the younger population only speaks Bengali. And the ones in Orissa speak Oriya. The ones in Jharkhand speak Hindi. Now, for the community, it's really important that their language is not lost completely, right? So the elders and certain other like teachers, etc., prominent people in the communities want language revitalization to happen for Mundari. So, and they are looking at educational apps, technology that can help them with preservation and documentation of language resources, etc. So now you can see that even in this 0-class languages with no resources, if you do not understand the needs and the context of the community that speaks, it's of absolutely no use for you to create technology. For Gondi, we need a very different kind of technology. People need information access, right? Whereas in Mundari, most people use the dominant language for information access, right? They can use Bengali in West Bengal to access news and other things, but they need technology to preserve their language, right? To revitalize the language. So the reason I gave this example is to kind of emphasize that you really need to understand the users of the technology, the needs of the community for which you're building technology, right? Okay, so another question that we get asked a lot is, can we truly impact a low resource language community? Because what happens is, like, mostly the low resource language community is also a community, and the reason why it's low resource is because it's also a community which is marginalized in other ways, right? Now, is it even possible for us to impact? It's like, a lot of people say, what's the point of providing information or what's the point of providing keyboards in the language? There are bigger problems here. They need water, they need electricity. And I think if you take a very linear approach to these things, like, okay, we'll go to the next problem only after we've solved this problem, and we'll go to the next problem. We'll be still, like, somebody like me in 100 years would still be sitting with somebody like you in 100 years and talking about the same problems again and again, right? So I think we need to deal with this, simultaneously, and we can actually impact low resource language communities with technology. By creating more human aware NLP systems, and by thinking of human and the machines together as a system, and therefore, so that we can design and optimize for social impact, right? We all understand that there's a limit in resources. None of us, whether you work for a multinational company or you work for a small NGO or you're an academic, nobody has access to unlimited resources to go and create whatever they want, and do it like, okay, let's do a lot of things for this language and then this language and then this language. So we have to somehow come up with a methodology that allows us to design in such a way that we can have social impact within whatever constraints that we are working in. So, and to do that, you really have to have a deep understanding of the community that I just keep saying this again and again, because I think it's something that as technologists, we don't always think about. We are much more in the highs that algorithmic or architectural or systemic innovations and inventions give us, that we forget who and why we are building these things, right? So some of the things that we need to consider when we are doing this is, of course, data. Like all the technology that we have right now for languages requires a lot of data, and think of new approaches and community efforts to do this. Techniques, can we bootstrap existing techniques? Are there new models and algorithms? For example, now we have like transformer based models which are very good at learning or adapting with smaller amounts of data. That's relatively small. It's still a lot of data that we have to do. Applications, can we just focus on for underserved communities on verticals with social impact? So can we look at healthcare and kind of tackle it from an application oriented way? So these are all the ways in which we can kind of optimize our impact while still working under the constraints that we are situated in. Okay, so just an example of extending language technologies. So developing speech recognition and machine translation models for underserved Indian languages, you need all these things. Like there are 22 official languages in India. There's 722 or more other languages, most of which have little or no data. There's dialects, there are different dialects that everyone speaks. There's this huge diversity. How can we even build technology for everyone in this country, right? And how can we even get data? And of course, like one of the ways, there are several ways of doing this, but one of the ways that is effective is collecting data through crowdsourcing. In this way, we can actually get a lot of diverse data, good quality data, at a cost that is a fraction of actually going out and or getting people to come and record in a targeted manner. And we can also do this very fast. So one of the projects that we've been working on in MSR. Sorry, you have a question? You're telling me 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So one of the projects, I'll go very quickly. So one of the projects that we have is called Project Karya. It's a smartphone-based crowdsourcing platform. It was initially designed by my colleague Vivek Seshadri to give work, to provide digital work to mostly people in rural communities who do not have access to work on digital platforms. But we discovered that this is a very effective way of doing data collection, right? And we've been doing this, Karya has now been spun out, and we've been doing all kinds of voice data collection that can allow us to build speech user interfaces for these languages. And it's been really, really successful. So we've partnered with a startup called Navana Tech and collected data in Oriya, I think almost 1,700 hours of Oriya data in less than 5 months. So 4 months from beginning to end, is all it took for us to collect that much data, right? So this is just explaining how we kind of went with Karya to collect the journey with Karya to collect data of different kinds, and how it's been absolutely effective in collecting the right. The other thing that I wanted to just briefly touch on is like our work with Pratham Books. So Pratham Books, if I don't know if any people here are aware of, it's like a not-for-profit organization with the aim of providing a book in every child's hand. And they already work on some I think nearly 200 languages now at the last count. And they work from grade 1 to 3, 4 mainly. So it's for like very young kids. And one of the problems that so they have generic solutions in the sense like they have like these books which are open source, so anyone can go there and translate it into any language that they feel like, right? So a lot of work is done. They do have people on the payrolls to keep creating more books in more languages, but mostly they only have this um, volunteer based extension of their work. So what they wanted was a way which would support the people who are translating from existing books to new languages, right? And their problem with using just a generic translator was that it does not capture nuances and contextual knowledge. It doesn't take care of the fact that there is a readability. You can't have very high complicated hi-fi words for class 1 student, and there is no solution at all for underserved languages. So this is what their current thing looked like. And then we basically created an AI assisted tool called interactive neural machine translation, which provided support to the translators, the human translators, by giving them suggestions, on as they type. So this is like your predictive text as when you do it in a single language, right? Like on the phone or whenever you type, it gives you suggestions for the next word. Now we did the same across languages. So when you're translating from, say, English into Hindi, it would provide the next suggestions, and as you choose, it would keep changing what the next suggestion is going to be. So I'm going to stop here and just give you, I'll share the slides with you so that you can go through them, and please feel free to contact me for anything that you wanted more information on. And to summarize, I would just like to say that I firmly believe that technology enables communities, and all these data, techniques, applications all have a role to play, but we have to do a little bit of unconventional thinking to make it happen. And my and our group's way forward in this is that we work on Indian languages and expand to the world. So we've also then been working with some groups who currently are working with African languages. So because very similar problems. And that's the way we try to tackle this problem head on. And I'll just leave you with this.
Thank you so much. Actually, loved your talk. It cleared like a lot of things, and your attitude towards research is like very motivating, as in not just thinking of collecting resources, as in just collecting resources should not be the milestone, and you should actually think of the process step by step, making more sustainable systems. And this is very insightful that how these projects are revitalizing all the languages and so the communities. So thank you so much, Dr. Bali, for the
You're
talk.
welcome. Any questions, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, I'll hand over it to our WiCS member, Vrinda Khandelwal. She is fourth year computer science major. She'll take the session.
Thank you, Dr. Bali, for that extremely insightful talk. I have a few questions with me already from the WiCS members. If anybody else wants to ask a question, you can send the questions to me or any of the hosts, or you can feel free to unmute and ask the question yourself to Dr. Bali. So Dr. Bali, my first question to you is, notwithstanding things like budgetary constraints, of course, what are the limits of technology when it comes to cultural preservation, especially preservation of languages and language diversity?
Sorry. So that's a very broad area, right? So like it even in preservation of language, etc., it really spans a very broad area. So if you mean preservation of documents, for example, a lot of work has been done in that area for a long time. So you basically have technology-based solutions that will help you preserve, say, older documents in a digital form, so that they're available for future generations to use. If you're talking about things like oral culture, there are people who've been working in this area, and again, it's mostly like creating a kind of a repertoire, like a repository of such things, which is indexed, people can access it. So it's much more like, having a library of such things that are easily searchable, accessible to people in different ways and forms, right? In fact, one of the things that the Gondi community wanted us to help them with, and we never got a long way in doing that, was to create something of that sort. So they had this phenomena called gotul in their community, where they actually so gotul was a place where young people were sent after they reached a certain age, puberty essentially, right? So it was like a commune where all the young people stayed together, and they were taught the skills. They were taught dance and music is very important to the community. So a lot of their values and cultural norms are conveyed from one generation to the other through dance and music, right? So they were taught different kinds of dances, different kind of music, different kinds of agricultural practices, etc., etc., together. They lived together. Now, what happened was that at some time, the Britishers kind of went and studied gotuls, and consequently, even after independence, that whole thing, they kind of said, because they're the young people staying together, right? So they kind of like named it very disparagingly as some kind of brothel situation. And that narrative kind of continued even after independence. And, there was a real push back in having these gotuls, even in modern India, right? So, but it's their cultural heritage, it's the way they think of imparting education. It's the way they think of passing on to the next generation and training the next generation, right? So they wanted us to work on something around creating a digital go tool, for them, an online or a digital go tool. And the reason why we didn't get too far was like we needed academic partners for that purpose, and like that didn't really happen. But there are things like that are happening. But ultimately, what I have to say is that, like, if you go back to the first thing that I said, one of the first things that I said, that technology amplifies human abilities. If as a community you do not want to preserve your language or your culture, nothing in the world, no resources, no technology in the world is going to make it happen. It has to come from the community. If the community does not want it, it will not happen. If the community wants to preserve language, then technology can go a long way in helping them.
Thank you for that interesting answer. It also answers one of my other questions, which was about technology adoption and the kind of resistance you face to deploying the systems you've created. But now I'm going to ask you a question from Rutu. So Rutu wants to ask, currently for underserved languages, is the larger challenge to collect enough data for the communities or to train models for them?
Data, mostly data. So if you ask me what the biggest bottleneck in creating the technology is, it's data. We know mostly that the pipelines are there. We know how to create technology. It's not, there can be some specific things, language-wise specific things that you might have to take care of here and there, but there's nothing that prevents us. There's nothing that's a showstopper. Having said that, what kind of data? Who are you collecting the data from, in what form you're collecting the data, all those things become really important. So it's not just like you scraped and you got stuff off YouTube. That is a good way to start, but then there are all kinds of questions about quality. That can be a good way to start. I'm not saying that is the good way to start. That could be a good one of the ways, but you also have to kind of understand that especially when you go to these marginalized and vulnerable communities, that when you're collecting data, are you doing it ethically or not? Are you actually, not only are you respectful of the people who are providing you data, but also are you ensuring that you don't get, you're not harming the community and the people in any way? So those are things that when we say data, we're like, oh, we'll just go there, we'll put a mic in front of them and we'll just record them. But you have to think a little bit more of the context in which you're doing that. And my favorite example of this is like when we did some work with a community in Madhya Pradesh, the women there. We collected data, right? We collected data from the men who interacted with the agricultural, the government agricultural centers, etc., etc. And we got all this data, which was like in their local Hindi, but it was all these really difficult Sanskritized Hindi words, right? Rasayanik, Kharpatwar Niyantran kind of things, right? The women never said those things, but women and men in that community are equally involved in farming. So women didn't even know what those terminologies meant. And we were just excluding this entire group because we never even thought of how the whole system works and where we are getting our data from. Right? And when we asked the women, so they kept saying like, ye kya hai? What is this? What is this? And then when we asked them, like, what would you say? We explained, like, what would you say? They said, keede marne ki dawai, medicine to kill the pests. And we should have thought of that, right? It's our responsibility to have thought of that. Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. So my other question to you is, I was wondering what sort of challenges you faced as a woman researcher in STEM.
Okay, so where do you want me to begin? So obviously, like, the typical things when I was younger and less confident about speaking out and calling out people, I think the biggest problem that I faced, and I think all women face, is not having a voice on the table. You could be in a meeting and you would be talked over. You would ask a question and somebody else would ask a question and they would hear their question, but not yours. You would offer an opinion or suggestion and it was as if like, people suddenly became deaf to what you're saying. The other thing that happened quite a lot in the past was if you worked with a male colleague, it was always assumed that you are their assistant. It's their work and you're helping them out. So they became the ones who were credited with generating the idea and being some kind of an intellectual, as a researcher, I'm talking about some kind of an intellectual powerhouse behind the work. And you were someone they consulted if they got stuck somewhere and they needed some help, right? So that was, again, something that was very common. Things are changing, things have changed. Also, like, I'm much older now. I have, though sometime when I like crossed 40, which was also a long time back, I kind of decided that I really don't care. I've had enough years of not calling out, excuse my language, but not calling out bullshit. So I will call out when I hear people saying absolutely stupid things, or I will not let it go and fall silent if somebody absolutely ignores me. And it has its consequences. Okay, like, of course you get heard and people have to hear you if you insist that, I'm sorry, but I don't think you answered my question. So let me say this again. Da 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 da. Can you please answer this? And you can persist and people will answer and people will. But what it also does is that the minute you open your mouth, people start rolling their eyes. Right? So it's like, oh my God, she started again. She's going to start again and like, give us one lecture on why women are not heard, etc., etc., etc. So that's the price, if I can say, that one has to pay. But I'm very happy to pay that price, and I'm glad I did pay that price, because I can already see that because of what me and my peers did when we decided that we are not going to take this anymore and we will speak up. Things have improved so that the people who came after us had lesser problems, at least in my organization, and so on and so forth. Like, so never underestimate either the impact of speaking up for yourself, because you're not speaking up for yourself, you're actually speaking up for everyone else who comes after you or who's with you, right? But also don't underestimate the price you'll have to pay. You will have to pay a price in the current circumstances of, standing up and speaking up and being counted. It's the way the world is right now. Hopefully it'll get better as we go through this process, and it is getting better. I see it for myself, but and never forget that I never forget that there were some other people before me who had to fight, who had to do things so that I could actually even be in a position where I could speak up, right? So I never forget that as well. The other problems is that there are very few women in research in technology. There are lots of women in India. I'm talking about the Indian context. In the US, etc., things are a little different. So there are lots of women software engineers. There are lots of women who are into development, right? But in research, there are very, very few women. So that's another consequence or like drawback that we have, that our community is thin in some sense. So it's really, really important, I feel, to be able to network across the known boundaries. So like, not just my research organization or my lab, but what others are doing, and build that network, because all of us need it. All of us need it very badly. You won't realize how much you need it, and till you get out of academia, because you are somewhat sheltered in academia. But when you get out of it, that network is so essential. And the other thing which is improving is, which is improving a lot. This is where I've seen the biggest difference in, is having male allies. So having men speak up for you. When I started off, nobody even thought that this was a problem. Even if some men, even if they were witness to something that happened to you, and even if this afterwards, they would come and tell you that they did not approve of it, none of the men spoke up or supported you. But now that's changing a lot. So, know who your male allies are. You need them again at every step of the way. And just remember that, in some sense, we humans are a part of a community. So know who your community is as a woman in tech or STEM, and cultivate that. You know, be there for others as you expect others to be there for you. So, be there for your juniors, be there for your peers, pass it forward. Because if we don't have that community, if we don't build that community, then we're kind of not going to be able to change things where, nobody then needs to ask me a question that what does it feel like to be a woman in STEM? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bali. And I think everybody will agree with me when I say that you serve as a role model for a lot of us, for especially for younger people, and which is why I believe, and other WICS members believe, that it's important to sort of call upon people from minorities or underrepresented communities to sort of give these sort of talks. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Just also, I think people in Ashoka are probably much more exposed to this. Be aware of intersectionality as well. Be very, very aware of that. Most of us, I would say, I'm just like going out on a limb and making a generalization here without really knowing people, but like just from my experience, and I might be wrong, most of us come from very privileged backgrounds, right? And we still struggle as women to level the playing field. Now, to that add, all kinds of socioeconomic factors, and think of what it means to be a woman coming from an impoverished background in terms of economic power, and then coming from a socially disenfranchised community, right? And then just think of how big the problems become then, right? So always be aware of your privilege and how it works for you. Not so that, like, I'm not saying that you should, somehow think, like, I have this AC in my room and now I shall go and live outside in a tent to experience. I mean, you can do that. You definitely are within your rights to do that. But more from the perspective of being aware of your privilege so that you know how it works and therefore can understand how it does not work for many, many of your colleagues and peers, right? And therefore being able to help in whatever way, not like just individually, but help construct a narrative around what we as women in STEM need to do. No, it's not just gender. Sorry, that this is like my, if I'm, this is like my soapbox. So I can go on forever.
Thank you, Dr. Bali, for patiently answering all of our questions and giving us that wonderful talk. It was an honor to be with you here today, to listen to you, to listen to your perspective. And we really hope that you come to Ashoka again.
I hope so too. Yes to that. Thank you for having me over. It was a pleasure. Always love talking to students.
Thank you so much, Kalika.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If I may be so bold, I had
Sure.
come in under a different name, so my students wouldn't notice me. I'm one of their professors.
Hi.
I was listening quietly. Thank you so much for this. It was really, really wonderful. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much. Thanks a bunch. Have a happy Diwali if you're celebrating.
Happy Diwali to you as well. And I was wondering if I could ask one more question that I
Sure.
had.
Sure.
So you talked about, you gave that example where the understanding of languages could differentiate between genders or even like various sects of the community. So I was wondering how could the systems that you deploy or anybody else working in language technology deploys reinforce like
A lot.
sexism and
A
other
lot.
social stigmas that are already prevalent in the language, and sort of where do you differentiate, I mean, where do you bridge the gap, because you also want to create a system that's sort of realistic but one that isn't so biased?
Yeah, so the thing is, that's where like an understanding of the context. As technologists, we're just coming to grips with this, to be honest. We're just beginning to understand that, technology is not neutral, which is what we've been told right from the start, right? And we all very firmly believe, like, technology is neutral. It's like these humans out there and the society and the politics that taints it somehow. But, technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within these systems and it reflects these systems very clearly. And we're just beginning to kind of scratch the surface here. A lot of it, a lot of things at a very superficial level are about, like I said, being very sure where your data comes from, because most of the systems these days are going towards um, mm, um, machine learning systems, right? Like data-driven technologies. So where your data comes from is extremely important. So all the stuff that you hear about biases in data and fairness in algorithms is something that you really, really have to be careful about. But more than that, this whole thing of where your technology is going to be used, who's going to be using it, and is your technology designed and is your technology going to be deployed in a way that is representative and inclusive of the people who are going to use it? Never forget the users. We kind of think like user study, user design, user is something that other people will do, right? These like HCI also most people think is like, oh, that's it, what these, multidisciplinary, whatever type of people they do. But never forget your users. Technology on its own is nothing. What is the fun of creating a technology if, like, no one can use it? And that's where the whole thing comes. And we see it. It's just that we've been so normalized. These things have become so normalized that we don't even think of it. I don't know. Even ages ago, if when all these Siri kind of things started, I'm not saying Siri itself, but a lot of these voice assistant kind of things started. Why do they have to be women voices, right? And it's because women are supposed to be the ones who are taking orders, like secretaries are women, right, in certain cultures. Now, if you went into the, for example, certain different parts of the world, for example, when I was working in a different company in Belgium, we had to create something for Arabic. We had to create it in a man's voice because no man in that context would take an order from a woman, like a woman telling him like, wake up, it's time to get up, it's your appointment, etc. So there it had to be. So these things become so ingrained, and so often we hide behind cultural norms. That is the culture of the place. I think it's high time we started questioning the culture of the place. So be Did I answer your question? I don't know if I did. Data?
No.
How is your technology design including all possible users of that technology? And then the context. And don't hide behind cultural norms. I mean, sometimes, yes, like, it is a culture to do certain things, but just question whether you're actually using culture as a kind of, some kind of a shield to hide behind.
Thank you for your answer. You did, and you brought forth so many other interesting points also. I've had like very heated debates on using female voice for assistant voice recognition and assistant systems. So yeah, I understand the angle.
Yeah. My thing is like you should create both and leave it to the users. At least you give them a choice.
Yeah, I think that's what Apple is doing now. You can choose.
Now mostly everybody is doing that. Yeah.
There is just one last question by Meghna. So Megha actually, so she's asking that language is both verbal and non-verbal aspects to it. So is there any research or literature on how technology can leverage this more universal non-verbal aspect of language to not just bridge the gap between communities?
Gestures, is that what you mean? Like when you mean non-verbal, do you mean like
body language?
Yeah, so there are people who are working on gestures as well. Now, there are also, if you're doing speech, then you also think about the tones, because a lot of your emotion and pragmatic information is conveyed by how you say something rather than what you say. So there's a lot of work on what you call prosody of language, the prosodic structure of a language and what it conveys in terms of meaning. So there are a lot of such things, and there is work in multimodality which kind of tries to put these together, but it's still not very advanced. They're very, I don't think there are any deployed systems that effectively, because we don't even know how gestures differ across languages so much. So it's an open area of research right now, but there is like there is some work done in that area.
I think anybody else has any question?
I think we've kept Dr. Bali long enough. It's almost time for lunch. So if nobody has any questions, I think we can end the talk.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, then you can just send me a mail. I'll answer. And see you all sometime. Hopefully.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Bali.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.